Well, today we're in Psalm 133, and let me introduce the subject of unity, for that's what the writer is encouraging us to have. When you think about it, the opposite of that, division and strife, has caused so much harm. You can see it in the nation. The nation is divided. You see, rather, strife and division in the home, and ends up in a divorce court or it's chaos. You see it in the workplace, and sometimes even among God's people in the church. And so David is looking at this in Psalm 133, and he begins by saying, "Behold, how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell in unity." Now, I just mentioned the opposite for just a moment because it's just so devastating. When you see the nation tearing itself apart, or you see the home falling by the wayside, we need to understand how important unity is. Now, there may be some things that are more important than unity, but let me tell you something. It's a short list. And that's why David said it is good and it is pleasant. Now, I'll tell you something. There are some things that are good, but not pleasant. And I'm not going to tread into that water. And on the other hand, there's some things that are pleasant, but not good. In fact, when you think about it, Paul is addressing this kind of subject in the book of Corinthians. Really, he starts in chapter 1 by saying, "Let there be no divisions, that is, strife among you." And what he's telling them is not to do that kind of stuff. And really, the servant of the Lord, Paul told Timothy, is not contentious. And one of the things that should draw us together and for us to strive for the unity of the faith, Ephesians 4, verse 13. And by the way, when he starts that chapter in Ephesians 4, he begins to talk about how we ought to strive, make every effort for the spirit of unity and peace. So it's something that ought to be a priority. And I know what gets involved here. Sometimes it's personality, and sometimes it's pride. And I'm just trying to say how destructive it is. And so it's important for us to understand, can I emphasize it, how important it is for unity. Without unity, you really can't function properly. Whether we're talking about an automobile or a workplace or the home or even in the church. In fact, it's kind of like an orchestra. It's interesting to me because I've watched our grandchildren, play instruments in school, and when they start out, it kind of is the unity really isn't there. I mean, they're striving for it, but it's not very good. It's not very pleasant. But as they grow and mature, as the years pass by the time they get down the road somewhere, it really is good and it's pleasant to hear. Can you understand what I'm saying? That unity is so very, very important. It's like a beautiful orchestra. Every instrument is in tune. And what puts us in tune is the Bible. It's God. It's Jesus. And we ought to strive for it. So the writer says how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. I always say, if there's fights out there doesn't need to be fights in here when you come. We need to have that kind of unity. Now, notice again, he'll use some examples that are rather foreign to us. We would probably use some other kind of examples, but let me go ahead and say what the psalmist said. It's like precious ointment on the head that runneth down on the beard. And then refers all the way back to the book of Exodus, where speaking of Aaron, when he was appointed the high priest, he was ordained by God, demonstrating how important it was and how good it was and how pleasant it was. And then he'll use the second example of Mount Hermon. You may not know this, but Mount Hermon's like some of those mountains out there in Montana. It's nearly 10,000 feet high. And that was the water supply for the Jordan River. How refreshing it was. So what he's given us is some examples to illustrate. It would have meant a whole lot more to those that read it in ancient times. But the point is that he's stressing, and it's so important. And let me encourage you that you strive for unity, not division, not things that tear things apart, not things that cause things to collapse, but you strive for unity as you relate to one another. Great lesson, needed lesson, that we strive for the unity of the faith. So I'll be seeing you next week if I don't see you on the Lord's Day, and we'll continue our study in the book of Psalms.